Hello everyone and welcome again to our podcast. Today I have Tshepo Mantje with me on the couch, and today we're going to talk about the role of men in early childhood development in the space that we both work. And typical to all our conversations, we ask a slightly playful intro. And the playful intro today, so I'll first of all tell you about my experience, and I so often don't think about it before the time. I was going down to Worcester, and I was meeting with the mayor and the MECs, and I got into this very formal environment and suddenly realized, oh my goodness, it's all going to be in Afrikaans, and I don't speak Afrikaans. And so in the same vein, I'd like you to tell our audience about a humorous situation where you found yourself the Lone Ranger, the only man in the room, and some humorous thing that might have happened in that space.
Okay.
We can get to that later though. In the nonprofit sector, male leadership is quite uncommon. To begin the conversation, how did you end up in early childhood development?
Yeah.
What got you there?
What got me there? So many things, right? I can't necessarily say it's one particular thing.
Okay.
But I have sort of a story that comes to mind about my own early childhood development. And I'm from Welkom, Free State. Well, now my parents are there, but where I grew up was in a small town called Virginia in the Free State.
Right.
That's where my parents are from.
Okay.
And in my first 1,000 days, I guess.
You remember those?
maybe around at ECD, I think 3 to 5. Or when I was starting to go to ECD. But throughout that time, I was staying with my grandmother, even in the first 1,000 days.
Right.
I would be with my gran. My mom would drop me off, I guess, in the morning when she goes to work with my gran, and then pick me up when she comes back from work in the evening, and then we'll go home together.
Okay.
And I remember, vaguely remember my grandmother walking me to ECD, to my ECD center.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily like my ECD center. I didn't like going. I didn't think I enjoyed it that much.
Right.
But my grandmother would tell me about how I just have to hold on until she starts her own ECD, and then I'll go there.
Oh, nice.
And then she'd tell me sort of ideas and stories about what it's going to look like.
Yes.
And vivid. Like I remember clearly that I was expecting there to be little roads where we can ride our scooters all over the yard.
Right.
And I think that sort of, for me, created this ECD experience in my head that was never necessarily in my physical space.
Okay.
But I remember that quite fondly now. And when I think about that memory, it feels like it was sort of a seed of some sort when I was at that age.
Right.
But when I came sort of into more maturity was really in varsity, when on a whim, I wanted to take a year off because I thought I was going to do LLB the whole way through. But then I then took, after my BA,
Yes.
I did honors in psychology, and then I, on a whim, decided to do developmental psychology.
Okay.
And then I was introduced to theories of developmental psychology.
Yes.
I also did childhood disabilities and mental health as one of my courses.
Right.
So really, what got me here in terms of the actual knowing about early childhood development was, on a whim, doing a course in psychology, and then recognizing that I understand this language. I understand this approach to life when understanding this era of children to be so important.
Right.
The age group when they are in. So what got me there was getting to see what the theory, the language around childhood development.
Right.
And it just added color to what I was already feeling.
Well, I mean, you learned a lot sooner than I did. So I learned it when I met Pam Picken, an ECD expert that we work with. And she started talking to me about the importance of the early years. And it's from there that we actually started as a foundation focusing on early childhood. Because up until that point, I knew it was important, but I didn't really
Wow.
didn't really get it.
Yeah.
The facts that 90% of brain growth takes place before the age of 5, those kind of things like blow my mind, because we all think, are we going to university and that's where we get all our incredible knowledge, and yet it's actually in the early years. And the more I learn about it, the more fascinating it becomes, right?
Yeah.
And the more sad I feel often about the squatter settlements where we go, where there's not a single early learning center. There's no services, It hasn't been thought of. There are RDP houses there, but there's just no services for young children, So, given your role, your current role, how do you think your role as a man in the space that you're working in is going to enable a breakdown of those stereotypes and barriers to men?
Where I will start is sort of with what I've come to see as this cultural understanding of what manhood and masculinity is. And people have sort of divorced kindness, compassion, nurture from inherently masculine beings. And I think that's false. That's not true at all. It's not true that men are not inherently nurturing beings themselves.
Sure.
But we see that as what is sort of narrated to us, that people who are nurturing are women. That's why you see the jobs that are nurturing jobs are mostly done by women. ECD practitioners are women. When we look at maybe even nurses, although historically it might have been something different right now, nurses being women, and people believing that that's the idea. So where we'll start is that is just not the case. And I see people are still believing that. Even ECD practitioners sometimes believe that when they see me walk in the room to give workshops.
Yes.
And they're like, where's that lady you're working with? And then people ask me, where are you? Oh, you have children then, that's why. And I'm like, not even yet.
Yes.
So I think where it starts is really in understanding that we have that capacity as men. You can be nurturing. And practicing, starting with yourself, nurture yourself, show up for yourself with more kindness and compassion. And I find that it's worked for me to be able to show up in that way, to recognize that I have that quality in me. I just have to work on it because I haven't had the practice in it. While I was growing up as a boy into my manhood, there wasn't a lot of practices put before me that allowed me to engage with my nurturing nature.
Right.
So now I intentionally put practices in my life that allow me to access nurture.
Right. You mentioned earlier your grandmother. You grew up with your grandmother. Who was a male role model in your early years, just for my own interest?
Yeah. Well, my father.
You see, your father was present.
Yes, my father was present. Hardworking man. I think in the early years, though, he worked quite a lot, and from the perspective of being a provider, you know. And my mom took up the nurturing side of it. So where I saw nurture in men, I think it was much older through friendships. Around my peers. Where I think also I went to Rose University, which had a sort of more of a liberal space to be in. So I got to see peers, older mentors who were, softer and happily so. And those became my role models. Not to say people who are harder and more stern in their expression and anything wrong with that. No. It's to say that even in that, you can look deeper to find that there is contrast in you too. So I met people who allowed that contrast in them to come out later in my life. And that was just through peers, lecturers, people who had engaged with stuff before me.
Yes.
And I think that's inspired me.
Yeah, beautiful. What unique challenges and opportunities do you think men face in their leadership roles within the early childhood development space? So challenges and opportunities that men face.
Maybe not men, but coming to myself as challenges I have experienced as a man in that space.
Sure.
The first one I think my brain is running to is to a place of practitioners trying to sort of understand what you're doing here.
Right. Yeah.
And because again, it's not expected. But I wouldn't say it's a challenge because all I get to do is tell them and show them, and then it's welcome. So there aren't necessarily challenges unique to men that are that the sector has. But I think the challenges with men themselves to be allowing of themselves to be in that sector.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't think of anything where I think this is a unique challenge to men within the ECD sector.
Right.
But I think, the challenge is with men themselves, allowing themselves to be there.
Right. And then...
Is that making sense?
Yeah,
Please
yeah,
ask a clarifying question if you need.
No, it's good. It's good. Then what advice do you have out there for women to support men in ECD?
That's a hard one. Women do know best. So I don't want to advise.
Yes, Graham. Yes, Mom.
But I would say show the men in your life that they are able to be more nurturing.
Right.
So even your own children, your partners, like allow them opportunities to be nurturing without judgment, without it being a question of their masculinity.
Right.
Because it might be an embedded fear in men that when they show a certain side of themselves, their whole identity then crumbles. And that is sort of a place no one really wants to be. There's nothing to hold on to when your identity is gone.
Right.
So when a man shows a little bit softer side, a little bit of a nurturing side, when, they do that, encourage it and allow it, but also create the space for it. So encourage your husband or your partner to go play with the child outside and like create that environment where they can play.
Yes.
So the advice would be the suggestion rather, maybe not advice. The suggestion would be to pull out the nurture in the men in your life. It's there. I promise you, it's there.
Yes.
We just have to be kind about how we do it.
Yeah. Thank you. I mentioned to you briefly just before we did this podcast the work that we did in Umkamasi. And we took a soccer event, and we know men and boys are passionate about soccer. So we took a soccer event and we used that as an opportunity to connect with play. And we spoke about play earlier as well, how it is around connection. It's an opportunity for men to engage with children, which they don't always have those opportunities, and find ways that they can do that. What do you think about like play in terms of men and children and the ECD sector and those kind of opportunities?
I think play is actually, as men, our access point. Because we do play. We play video games. We play soccer. We like to jump off tall stuff.
Yes.
Because we understand there's this part of us that wants a thrill.
Right.
And believe it or not, children are exactly the same.
Yes.
Boys and girls, they love the thrill.
Exactly.
So I think play is our access point. And once, as men, we educate ourselves on the importance of play in early childhood development, you will realize the superpower you have as an early childhood development facilitator, practitioner, whatever that may look like.
Yes.
But so an opportunity like through soccer is a good way, where it's a sport play form that men are already doing and they love doing and are quite vulnerable in doing too. We spoke about vulnerability in our other episode. And you see a man falls on the floor during a soccer match. They will roll over because they are being vulnerable with an emotion, maybe sometimes overplayed.
A bit dramatic,
but that is our access point. We can do it on the soccer field. We can do it off the soccer field.
Yes.
So facilitating spaces of play would be great. And men can do that, can be the players for early childhood development.
Right. So this is this T-shirt. I'm not sure if everyone can see, but it's Babonisa, which is the Show Them campaign, which was the soccer event that I was talking to you about. As a closing remark, what would your encouragement be out there to men that want to enter the early childhood development space? I personally wouldn't change my work for the world. I love being in the space that I'm at, and I love the impact that I can have. And I don't think of it as a man's impact on the space at all. But I'm interested to hear from you, and the listeners would love to know, what would your word of encouragement be out there to men to get involved in this ECD sector?
Yes. I will say first, understanding what early childhood development is. There's a incorrect, false understanding of early childhood development as just a daycare center.
Correct.
But early childhood development is not a daycare center, but rather is a period of time that a child lives through.
Right.
Between 0 and 6 years old, even
Yes.
before birth.
Conception, yeah.
That time that a child is alive in those years, that is early childhood development.
Correct.
So when you are looking at a child who's 4 years old and
Yes.
you are in their presence, you are contributing to their early childhood development by
Sure.
just them being in your space. So that understanding alone already allows you to see your responsibility by being with the child. You are putting blocks on their house of life.
Right.
You know?
building
So
blocks.
yeah, so I think where I would advise is to understand what early childhood development is, this period of time.
Yes.
And then how is that period of time then influenced? That's when we come in. How do we facilitate development in that period of time?
Yes.
That's where we come in. So my advice would be, intentionally engaging with what early childhood development is. You will
Yes.
come to understand that it's a holistic framework,
Exactly.
which has multiple parts to it. So
Yeah.
there's an entry point for everyone. There's nutrition in early childhood development. There's stimulation of learning in early childhood development. There's healthcare,
Health,
maternal healthcare, child healthcare. There's parental support in early childhood development.
Exactly.
All of these things form a part of it. So
Yes.
there is something for everyone to do.
Yes.
And coming into this sector, I think also additionally, respecting and understanding the work already being done.
Right.
Because there's a rich history of early childhood development in South
Yes.
Africa. And I guess a little bit fear that I have is, as we're in this
Playtime.